Before I begin, I'd like to thank everyone who's taken the time to seek out and watch these videos as part of the International Conference on Men's Issues 2020. It was coming across videos like these during my own campaigns that helped motivate and inspire me, and I truly hope we can do the same for some of you. I'd also like to sincerely thank Elizabeth Hobson and Mike Buchanan from Justice for Men and Boys for their tireless work in delivering this extraordinary conference. Their work makes a world of difference. They were also some of the first people I met when I entered the world of social campaigning, which began at my university campus of Plymouth. My area of interest is student campus representation. My goal has been to create a men's officer role in my students' union, which would facilitate a men's forum on campus. This is a space where men's issues can be voiced, discussed, and acted upon to change the culture of campus and young people surrounding men's issues. I've been pursuing this goal for 5 years, and I'm pleased to say that things are improving. Success is on the horizon. Earlier this year, I presented a motion to create this role, a motion which fell by only a single vote. I've presented this motion 4 times now. With each successive presentation, support has grown until now. Now this endeavour is on the very precipice of success. This brings me to what it is I wanted to talk about today. Those moments which led us here, the parts we all play in each other's success. And so I bring you to working together for success. A distinct advantage I have when working during my campaigns is that each year my sample of voters and supporters gets refreshed as students graduate and more join the campus. Each year I get a blank canvas to work with and a new generation to probe for social attitudes. This means I've had the privilege of witnessing these attitudes change in a measurable way across the years. When I first began 5 years ago, the open support from those with voting rights was a tentative 30%. There was enormous stigma and fear around men's issues. The movement was largely shunned and thrown in with extremist ideologies. Topics such as privilege and patriarchy were used to shut down any points put forward around helping young men. And I've spoken before about the toil that comes with defending these issues and holding them up as important. It's fair to say that back then, if you were looking to organise, mobilise, campaign, and speak out about men's issues, you'd have to be ready for confrontation and work hard to gain support. Hard work worth doing. And despite this toil of misery, there is good news, I promise. This is a story with a happy ending, though as I continually stress, there is no end. Men's issues will always exist. People will always need help and should be willing to offer it. The good news is that was 5 years ago, and things have changed. Now, when I speak to the same council about supporting young men, there is enormous support. Men's issues are now widely recognised and accepted as one of the biggest crises of our generation. The compassion in our hearts is finding its way through to positive action. Now, the only discourse that remains is how best to deliver this. Now I can look around the same council chamber and find 50% support. The tipping point in general attitudes is now. So how did we get here? Well, it wasn't alone. I've spoken before about the enormous support that exists within this community and how it helps drive us forward. Now, I hope to highlight something else equally important. When I first attended the Messages for Men conference in London all those years ago, everyone in that audience had their own story. Everyone was working in their own small way to help make men's lives just a little bit better. Many had been hurt by the sting of injustice, but were determined that it wouldn't happen to those who followed in their footsteps. I remember thinking that of all these stories, my humble little campaign was the one being given the spotlight. The many amazing individuals contributing in their own small ways, despite the many amazing individuals contributing in their own small ways to what we're doing. Their stories were equally as amazing. And so something I find very special about this year's international conference is the sheer number of people presenting their work, stories, experiences and ideas. This is a truly diverse movement for social change. It is a real privilege to be able to hear all these stories, and I know there are so many more out there. So back to the question of how did my small little university campus jump from a meagre 30% support to 50%, tentative support to being on the verge of solid change. It wasn't because of me. Sure, I got a little bit better at collecting signatures, at writing slogans, at making campaign material, but I didn't create the change in the culture. This takes more than a couple of emails and a couple of campaign slogans. That is something that only happens when lots of people, without even knowing one another, work hard and tirelessly on the same thing in what small way they can. Between my first try 5 years ago, the Red Pill movie came out. The March for Men in Australia was headline news around the world. Books were published, interviews were held, countless new charities were formed, so much so that I couldn't even register the domain name of my own little charity because someone else was doing exactly the same thing as me on the other side of the world. Fancy that. People everywhere have been working tirelessly in the hope that the next person might have it just a little bit easier. And that work is paying off. The movement to address men's issues has no leader. It has many, many parts. The outlets for social change aren't isolated, they are everywhere. Websites, journalists, news outlets, YouTube. It's been trending on TikTok this past month, for Christ's sake. It's everywhere. Nobody here coordinated that. It just happened. The secret to social change, therefore, is that there is no secret. A good idea simply endures all criticism and attack. Let's help men. Let's recognise that men struggle. Let's help those men who face injustice. Let's not be blind to inequality when it affects men. Let's build a better world for men and women, for everyone. That sounds like a good idea to me, and it's certainly proven hard to dissuade people. That being said, we are not without obstacles. The percentages previously mentioned were from voting members, who are often more sceptical than the general public. When I canvassed general students, though, this year support was at an all-time high of 100%, a significant improvement from the former year of 96%. A slight disparity with the votes, of course, that reflect it. I have spoken before about some of the obstacles, both bizarre and alarming. For those who've not heard the strange ones before, I thought I'd share some of the unusual ways my SU has, well, shall we say, not supported this campaign, as well as the mundane barriers to delivering this service. Just as a recap and for context, the The goal has been to create a men's officer role at my university's Students' Union, which would facilitate a men's forum. This service would be the only on any campus in the English-speaking world, as those that have come before have been short-lived. Creating the role would make the service a permanent feature of student union functions and provide a platform and space for these issues. To achieve this, I needed to convince at least half of the student council to approve this motion, which would then be ratified and approved by the Board of Trustees. When I first began campaigning, I was told the Facebook page I'd made had to be changed completely. I'd used their pink, which they said was copyrighted. After I held my ground and asked for proof, it turned out it wasn't copyrighted at all. I also had to change the name because they didn't want people misunderstanding and thinking that there was an existing men's forum at the SU. Heaven forbid there should be this service on a campus. There were also more blatant and egregious obstructions which hold no water. When the motion was initially declined, I wrote directly to the Board of Trustees to point out that a charitable institution cannot deny a service based on gender. They then replied in those now famously laughable words: "The Equality Act of 2010 was not written for and does not apply to men." The fact that these words were said and believed still shocks me. I do find that deeply disturbing. I was also interrupted while collecting signatures by a number of Students' Union staff because a sabbatical officer had claimed I was wearing the wrong lanyard. I wasn't. Long story short, they didn't want me wearing Students' Union merchandise while campaigning. You know, in case people thought that this campaign to help young men on a campus had something to do with the Students' Union and the function of a Students' Union, which of course exists for students. That would just be a bad look for them. Then there was the Students' Union president a few years ago who claimed she had consulted a number of students who were against this and used their testimonies as a basis for denying this support. Solid grounding. Later probing revealed she hadn't spoken to any students, and when I asked her further, I was told that the complaint I was launching against this action was causing her mental health issues and that I would have to stop. She now works in a complaints department. Then there was the complaint to the Board of Trustees for their blatantly sexist comment and disregard of equalities legislation. They decided the complaint should be denied before it was even considered. Lucky for them, they had to approve all complaints before the procedure could start, and they chose not to. Their policies seemed to do everything to justify lunacy and counter this campaign. There was, however, a very helpful policy that you could represent any motion if you gathered 200 signatures. This is how I was able to keep presenting the same motion, but they caught on. So, not 1 month after I did this the second time, and at the earliest constitutional opportunity, the policy was changed to double this to 400 signatures. And I regret to let you know that I was only able to gather 350 before the pandemic hit. Shocking tales of a small little campaign on a small little university campus on some random little island, when I know there are thousands of small little campaigns scattered across the world, and I know many of you have had to combat difficulties and injustices as you strive towards making change. I previously emphasised the importance of not giving up. Now, I hope the context will help motivate others in their own small campaigns, of which I know there are many. Despite the difficulties, even a humble campaign can make a huge difference. A movement is a collective of parts, with each part adding to the wave that brings about great social change. I've witnessed this change happening year on year, and it's entirely down to the diversity and number of projects being done across the world. I don't create the change, we create the change. It is my greatest pleasure to be one of these parts, and I look forward to meeting and working with all the other parts and working together for success. Thank you everyone for all that you do. Thank you.